Hello, I am the Story Girl, and welcome to the story of the Snow Queen. Part 1, The Goblin Glass. Our story is beginning and you must attend. And when you have, you will have known more than you know now about a very wicked goblin. This goblin liked to tinker. He liked to make things. He liked to build. And the thing that he liked to build the most was glass. Yes, he had a whole wicked little workshop where he would build the most clever little gadgets and gizmos, but his most outstanding, the one he was the most proud of, was a glass. When I say glass, what I mean is a mirror. A mirror that whenever anybody looked in it, they only saw the worst in everything. They only saw the world as miserable and cold and gloomy and dark and painful. The goblin loved it so much that he showed it to all his students at his goblin school. He had a goblin school. Oh yes, he did. And at his goblin school, all of the little goblins clapped their hands for joy at seeing the beautiful miracle. Yes, they called it a miracle, and they took great pride in sneaking out and showing people their reflections in the mirror. For if you had seen your reflection in the mirror, all the things you thought were ugly about your face, about your hair, about your body would be pronounced, would be magnified to the 10th degree. If you thought that you had too large of a nose, in that mirror you would have seen the most bulbous, fattest nose in the world. If you were of the opinion that you had too many red spots on your face, when you looked in that mirror, you would see your face covered in red pussy spots. And the goblins laughed for glee, and they noticed what a frosty effect this mirror had on people. It gave some of the younger ones an idea. They wanted to see what the sun would see in the reflection of the goblin mirror. Well, they took it in their little goblin hands and they flew higher and higher, up and up and up and up towards the sun, but they were not wise little goblins. They did not realize that the sun's fingers were so sharp. The moment they came within miles of the sun, those sharp fingers shattered the glass, shattered it into uncountable little pieces. And some of these pieces were as tiny as dust and floated off across the world. The sun saw that it was not well done. He saw that each little piece of glass maintained the power of the larger mirror. And if a little piece of that glass got stuck in your eye, from then on, all you would be able to see was cold and darkness and the worst in people. That was very bad, but what was worse is if one of those little shards of glass pricked your heart. If it pricked your heart, then slowly you would only be able to think cold and frosty thoughts. Then your heart would slowly become encased in the crystal of the glass. So much so that you wouldn't be able to feel warmth. You wouldn't be able to feel kindness. You wouldn't be able to feel joy. Only hate and anger and gloom all the rest of your life. The sun shone as brightly as he could, but no matter how bright or how warm the rays from the sun were, he couldn't warm the hearts of people. He couldn't unbutton their heart pocket and warm up their heart, which was encased in the glass. He was very discouraged about this and went home feeling very glum indeed. And he talked to his wife, Mrs. Sun, who noticed that the sun was being quite gloomy, which was odd for the sun. She asked what was wrong, and he told her all the whole wicked story about the goblin glass and the shards stuck in the eyes and caught in the hearts of the men and women of the world. They talked about it. They agreed that they would send 2 of their own children down to earth. The sun, Mr. Sun, thought that they could get by with just 1 child, but Mrs. Sun wanted to make sure that their children were protected. If they sent 2, one could always look after the other. And so, one day, in the warmest moment of July, 2 drops, golden and with goodness, dropped down from the sun. They tumbled and turned and twisted and transformed into a baby girl and a baby boy. And these 2 children fell down to the human town and landed as light as Goose Down. The little girl was found on the doorstep of an old granny who, the moment she saw this little girl, her heart was warmed. She scooped up the baby and took it in to raise as her own. The little boy landed on the doorstep of a young man who'd recently lost his wife to a horrible sickness. He opened his door and saw the little boy and scooped him up. He thought he would have no children since his wife had died, but now he had this little boy to raise in his name and in the name of his wife. The granny named the girl Gerda, and the young man named the boy Kay. And it just so happens these 2 people lived right next door to each other. The granny noticed that Gerda was always warm, always toasty warm, so much so that she warmed the whole house even in the dead of winter. And anybody who spoke with her, even the most crabby and cantankerous of people, hearts were melted and saw smiles on their faces they hadn't seen in years. The young man noticed that Kay had the brightest eyes of any person he had ever seen, and as the boy grew, he soaked in all of the knowledge, reading books, memorizing facts and figures. Anytime he listened, you could tell he would remember. These 2 little children who possessed the light and brightness of the sun and the warmth of the sunshine grew up as the best of neighbor friends. The old granny and the young man saw that their children loved each other so much, they decided to set up a very special garden for these 2 children to sit in. You have to understand, this town had houses that had been built tall and thin and right next to each other. And on the ground, there wasn't room for a garden. So what the granny and the young man did was put planks of wood in between the window attic of the granny's house and the window attic of the young man's house. And upon these, they put large tubs in which they grew wonderful things that were good to eat and good for the kitchen, but also roses, beautiful rose plants. And every single day, Kay and Gerda would meet in their own private, beautiful rose garden. And these roses, influenced by the warmth and light of the sun, grew large and beautiful, tall and stately. And everyone said that the best roses in town came from their garden. The roses didn't last forever, of course. Winter would come with its icy bite and chill, and the flowers would droop and die and have to be stored away till the next spring. On those days, Kay and Gerda would sit next to Granny's old rocking chair. "Oh, yes," she said one cold winter night. "I see that the bees are swarming outside." "Those aren't bees, Granny, begging your pardon," said Kay, who knew quite a few things about insects. "Those are snowflakes." "Oh, yes," said Granny, taking no notice of the boy. "Those are the kind of bees that can sting your nose and bite your fingertips. You must be careful about them, children." "Oh, Granny," said Gerda, "do those bees have a queen?" She knew a few things about insects as well. Yes, all bees have a queen. Some more hardened than the last, but the queen of those bees is the queen that you should always be wary of. For if she were to touch you with her cold fingers, your heart would freeze into a lump of ice inside of you. "Oh," said Gerda. "Don't worry, Gerda," said Kay. "If that old snow queen comes here, I'll pick her up and put her on the stove. She'll melt away and there'll be no frozen hearts around here." "It's true, my children," said the granny, "but you should be very careful about who you let into your heart, be they a snow queen or no. You should always be very careful whose fingers you let unbutton your heart pocket. If it's the wrong person, your heart will break." Then Granny swiftly changed the subject to a lighter, more happy story. But later that night, as Kay was getting ready for bed, he heard the wind rattle against his window as if 1,000 little fingers were tapping against it. He went to the window and peered out through the frost and snow, and he saw the snowflakes did look very much like bees. They looked so much like bees, swarming, gathering around. He noticed that they were swarming thicker and thicker until they formed a woman. This woman stepped from the cloud of snow. She had bright white skin. She had white, frigid hair, but the most striking part about her were her eyes. They were completely white, frigid with the cold. She smiled at Kay through the window. She came right up to him and beckoned with her hand. "Little Kay," he thought he heard. "Little Kay, come with me." Well, Kay was so frightened that he closed the curtains immediately and went off to bed, shivering underneath his covers. That winter passed away. The snow all melted, with nobody's heart being frozen at all. But the next spring, Kay and Gerda spent their days once again in their beautiful rose garden between the two windows. One day, Gerda was reading a book about different animals from all over the world. Kay was pointing them out to her and listing all the facts he'd ever known about any of the animals, when all of a sudden, Kay shrieked, "Ow! Ow! Ow! Something's got caught in my eye! Ow! Oh, I felt an awful pricking in my heart. Gerda leapt up and looked carefully into his eye as his watering eye was swimming right this way and that. "Oh, okay, I don't see anything," said Gerda. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was the goblin glass. Kay had been pricked not only once, but twice. His heart began the process of being encased in crystal, and his eyes looked about and saw only gloom, hatred, and darkness. "Why are you crying, Gerda?" he said. "Makes you look pretty ugly. Look at these flowers. I can't stand them. Look, that one has a worm in it. So they're not beautiful after all." And he began to pick up the roses by the roots and shred them into many tiny pieces. Kay, stop," said Gerda. Kay only stomped on the roses and ran through the window away from Gerda. From then on, everybody said something was odd. Something had changed about little Kay. He wasn't quite as bright as he'd been before, even though he began learning all sorts of new things, such as memorizing times tables and learning the population of all towns throughout the country. He wasn't kind. He didn't use his knowledge for good. He stood up in class and recited the times tables as quickly as he could so that everybody would know that he did it the best. And one night, while old Granny was rocking back and forth, and telling stories of her youth, he stood behind her and did a very rude imitation of her long nose and her rocking, hunched back figure. One day, Kay came out of the door with his little sled in hand, turned to Gerda and said, "Gerda, I have permission to play with the older boys in the village square." And with that, he pulled his little sled behind him down the street. It was winter, and the boys' favorite game was tying their sleds onto one of the passing sleighs and seeing how long they could hold on as the sleigh picked up speed. Suddenly, up the road came the largest, grandest sleigh any of the boys had ever seen, and Kay knew it was for him. He would show them that even though he was younger, he was better at the sport than they were. And he quickly looped the rope of his sled over the sleigh and held on as tightly as he could. The moment the sled was connected, the sleigh began to pick up speed, so much so that little Kay thought his arms would be jerked out of his sockets. He held on tighter and tighter, and fear began to grow and grow and grow in his heart. He tried to remember beautiful music. He tried to remember the songs he had sung with Gerda, but all he could remember was the populations of all the towns in the countryside. And he was about to let go, about to fall off, when he saw a white hand raise up and wave at him from the sleigh. Oh, it was such a friendly gesture. He decided to hold on a little bit tighter until suddenly the sleigh came to a stop. And the figure in the sleigh stood up, all draped in regal furs. Kay saw that it was the woman he had seen at his window, the same frigid eyes. "How wonderful of you to come with me, little Kay," said the Snow Queen, frost dripping from every word. "You must be frozen. Please, join me in the sleigh. No need to hang on to your little sled any longer." Kay stood up and brushed himself off, went up to the Snow Queen. He was shivering. "Oh, you poor dear. You're so cold. I can fix that." And she took him in her arms and began to unbutton his heart pocket. He had forgotten everything that Granny had told him about that heart pocket and the heart that laid within. And with one swift motion, the Snow Queen kissed Kay's poor little crystal-encased heart, and a layer of frost went over the layer of crystal. It felt like the jolt of an icicle had been pierced through his center. He thought for a moment he would die from the cold of it, and then he felt nothing. Not cold, not warmth, not happiness, not sorrow, nothing. "There," said the Snow Queen as she buttoned up his heart pocket. "Now you will come and live with me in my castle in the North Country." "Oh, but my father and Granny and my friend..." At those words, the Snow Queen gave another swift kiss, this time to Kay's forehead, and he forgot. He forgot his town, he forgot his friends, he forgot his father and Granny, and immediately rattled off the 13 times tables. "Well," said the Snow Queen, "I can see that you are very bright. Sit at my foot and tell me more. But don't forget my sled." It seemed to Kay that his sled was very important at that moment. "Of course not," said the Snow Queen. She brushed her hand, and suddenly a whole flurry of snowflakes formed into a little white chicken that flew along with his sled attached behind, and the two of them flew off, Kay becoming colder and colder every moment, but not feeling it at all. Kay did not return home. All that the older boys could say when they were asked was that he tied his sled to one of the sleighs that was passing by, and they hadn't seen him since. The grown-ups all looked at each other worried. They searched the village lanes and roads. They didn't find him or any trace of his sled. And then they saw that the tracks of the sleigh had gone next to the river. The river was frozen hard, so they searched the river through, but they didn't see it. They didn't see Kay or his sled anywhere. "Oh, perhaps he fell into the water," said the village grown-ups. "Perhaps Kay is no more." But Gerda did not believe it. Gerda sat still in her home all the winter long, waiting for Kay, waiting for the return of the sun. There will be more. Just wait.